Secondly, I should probably give the figure and say how important the Commission takes working with NGOs. 12 to 15% of our funding goes via partners, either European NGOs or southern NGOs. So that's just to give a flavor of the intensity of our partnership. But that's where I'd like to start being a Eurocrat and talk more about the novelty and answer your question. I think our partnership is now so mature that it's time that we move beyond the funding issue only. Our feeling from talking to NGOs in the field is, and certainly that comes out very strongly from Northern Africa, is that yes, we want your money, and yes, that is appreciated, but we want Europe to do more. We want Europe to understand how we work, our working conditions, is there space for civil society, is the government allowing us to work and play our role, and is Europe, in its dialogue with those governments, pushing for that space. Now, that is a rather challenging and tall order, but it is one that we will, I think, state very clearly in our communication that we are working on for the moment. How does that fit with the Agenda for Change? Well, that sits perfectly with the Agenda for Change, because Agenda for Change is very much about stronger and stricter human rights and governance conditionalities. And we cannot achieve that by simply banging on in policy dialogues with a government that we want to see improvements in human rights. There needs to be domestic accountability. The government is of course, accountable universally for international human rights standards, but it is towards its own people, first and foremost, that accountability should be exercised. And hence, civil society needs to be equipped to exercise that democratic scrutiny. So this is, in a nutshell, how we think our relationship with civil society will grow and become more strategic and more demanding on all sides of the equation: Europe, civil society, and our partner governments.
I think what this meeting will probably say, and we'll hear it from the floor, is that it's now a case, the phrase in English, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's how it works on the ground, and I think it's how it's to be implemented. All the great ideas, and we really look forward to the paper in October that comes out, and I know that many of my colleagues around the room are feeding into that paper and feeding into your colleagues, Christian. But it's how that happens, because I think the issue is that once you leave Brussels and move to the programmes themselves, sometimes that sort of intention becomes a rhetoric, and we've got to make sure the rhetoric moves on. We've got to sort of really mean consultation. We've got to be more participatory and inclusive, which I know is part of it. It can't just be a tick box process. Yes, we've talked to civil society, and so that's one area. The other area I think that hasn't been thought through enough and does need to be thought through is the relationship between southern civil society and the churches, where many of the city agencies work with, and the agencies themselves, the CAFODs, the Trocaras, the Miseriors, but how they work together. And again, a lot came through yesterday about how important it is that the relationship we have and how we act as facilitators, supporters, capacity builders, technical supporters to southern civil society, and that relationship was valued quite strongly. So perhaps the European Commission seeing that relationship as a whole.
And I'll start by looking at the roles of the civil society organization on the ground. One, I think most civil society organizations are good at service delivery, and they are good at reaching the unreachables or reaching the marginalized group, and they have a lot of experience on that. So for me, still service delivery is one of the key areas, and it's from delivering these services that they also draw their legitimacy and mandate, and they will get their voice to talk about issues at the national level. So that is one. Secondly, on policy influencing, there are two issues here. There are international instruments, human rights and all that. They can easily talk about that. But our government may sign into these treaties and instruments, but actual implementation may not be there. So for that, civil society are ready to engage because those instruments are there. But there are other things about practices, and for them to influence certain policy and practices, they need evidence from the ground, and they need to do evidence-based policy or lobby and advocacy, and they need to do actions on the ground to engage in evidence-based policy and advocacy. Secondly, while I know that civil society can take up demand for governance and democracy and all that, they have other roles like innovations, development innovations. NGOs, civil society are small organizations. They can easily innovate programs on the ground, which can be taken up by government and upscaled. So while I know that concentrating so much on governance is good, but let's not miss the actual implementation of projects and programs on the ground. So that is one. Of course, for civil society to deliver on their mandates, they need capacity building, in terms of their own institutional development, because if you look at the context of civil society in these countries, they are all at different levels. In some countries, they are more organized. In others, they may not be that organized. So we need for capacity building in terms of institutions, in terms of their role in policy, advocacy, in their role of demanding for good governance and democracy. So they need more capacity building from the EU. And basically that's it. Thank you.
Yes, of course, the EU has a role in strengthening civil society organizations. And you will see in the DCI proposal that strengthening civil society is a major goal, and it's in the thematic programs. It's not only in the geographic programs, meaning that even countries who no longer find the possibility to apply for the geographic programs will find a continuity in the thematic programs, so that civil society organizations will remain an overarching objective for the European Union as a whole. That being said, your enthusiasm about CSOs as having a function in holding governments accountable, I'm an elected politician. And I think that the first organizations, institutions who have to hold their governments accountable are parliaments, be they local or national or regional. Elected bodies have to be strengthened. All too often, CSOs, you know this. Wide, beautiful names, and there are 3 people very active inside. What's the representativity of CIOs? Very often in developing countries, this is a real problem. And of course, there is a huge expertise inside even small organizations, and an enormous commitment and energy. But once again, it's to Parliament to hold governments accountable. And I think that where the DCI, the current DCI, and also the proposal for the DCI has its weakness, is that the European Union does not feel this responsibility to strengthen the capacities of staffs of parliaments, to strengthen capacities of parliamentarians.
We need the EU to push the government to provide the necessary space. But I think we need to look at different context. As he said, in Ethiopia, there is this, it's really difficult to do that. But are there any other innovative ways of working with them so that they can build the civic voice as they implement their service delivery program in such countries? So if they can build the capacity, if the CSOs, through the delivery of projects at community level, can include in their work some level of civic awareness, not necessarily confronting the government. They will build that voice from the ground to question the government instead of the civil society themselves doing it. So in some countries, so we really have to look for ways of increasing the voice. But in areas where there are spaces, I think it can be done and it can be enhanced so that they can systematically and strategically engage the government to ensure accountability and democracy.
Indeed.
But the challenge could be, even in those countries, NGOs or CSOs have played a complementary role with the government, because in some areas, especially as I said, the hard to reach areas, it's the civil society doing the service delivery. Yeah. And if, of course, from yesterday's discussion and presentation, we've learned that it is not only playing policy advocacy role or the role of a watchdog. They can still implement projects through other streams or sector-based projects. So I say that is possible, but in some areas, the civil society have also practically, for instance, I'll give you an example in Kenya. Like 2 years ago, some civil society activists were demanding some things from the government, and it's contained in the constitution of the country. But after 2 days, the two of them who were actually speaking on TV about an issue were found dead in their car. You know, so the government sometimes see them as opposition and really try to stifle their voice. So it can be counterproductive at times. So maybe that's what I have to say there.
I do think that the European Union is far too shy in putting pressure on governments who do not allow sufficient public space for civil society organizations, but also for political parties to exist. And a good example is Ethiopia, where the geostrategical interest of Ethiopia as the one stable country in the Horn of Africa, as opposed to Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan, even Kenya is not as stable as Ethiopia. Nice kind of dictatorship who doesn't say its name. I was the EU chief observer in Ethiopia in 2010, so I know about this. Meles Zenawi and I had a nice fight for 5 hours, in which 2.5 hours he was shouting at me, and the next 2.5 hours he was calming down. It was nice. It was very nice work. But I had the public space to discuss with him, but civil society has no space at all. And 99.6% of the seats went to the ruling party. So much for this so-called democracy. Let's be serious. And the EU is extremely shy on this. Where is the EU? Where is Catherine Ashton slamming her fist on the table? She doesn't. We are absent in Africa, politically speaking, at this moment. Although in Senegal, I must say, I think the EU has played a very useful role. Extremely useful. The member states plus the European Commission, the External Action Service, excellent role. But on the whole, I think the EU is much too absent from Africa, from political issues like the public space that you need to be able to voice the concerns of people, of citizens. I regret this. And we shout about this in Parliament. We say we need more. But we need you also to say this aloud. Because we need pressure from outside Parliament also. Okay? We are nothing without this kind of voices. Yeah? You have a responsibility here.
First of all, I think that there's a strong sense amongst many CIDSE agencies. We believe very much in this idea of subsidiarity, that you try to take decision making to the lowest level and support those structures and as best you can. I suppose it's a question of how it's done is where I would start. When you look at local authorities and local government and local representation throughout the South, you cannot have one model. It's not a European model. What's true in Africa isn't the same in Latin America. Is it a regional basis? Does it go right down to the tribal level? Does it go to a village elder? It's a very complex issue, so context is everything. And therefore it's a lot of homework for, I think, people in the representation to get it right. But certainly the sort of sense that not everything should tie in with national government, that it should be the implementation of many of the development ideas should be done at a local level.
I'm afraid my experience isn't that good. And there is this famous call by CSOs to support Kenya last year during the drought event, which was said to be the worst in the last 60 years. And the support that civil society, or the engagement of civil society with the private sector, is kind of give us donations so that we can reach out to this community. So that is one which is actually like asking for donations so that we can support this community. And the other one is through this corporate social responsibility. that we have this project, it's kind of maybe contribute to your profile or to your profit making, please support this. So I haven't seen a lot of space with the civil society engaging with the private sector as such. That is my own experience. Maybe in other regions where I have not worked, it may have been there. And one thing also, organization like ours is also investing in, we call them social entrepreneurs. And the way it works, we invest in projects which build the capacity of local actors to produce things that are consumed locally. For instance, we can train a local group on energy efficient stove making. So if we train them, we transfer the skills to them, they can now transfer that skill and sell that skill to the local people, and they earn money out of it. So that is my little experience with the civil society organization. Maybe others in here have better experience than I do.
We will work on the macro level on stimulating the business climate as a whole, work with intermediaries, chambers of commerce, etc., to make the country pro-business. And we will, to a certain extent, use blending, leveraging grants to have private funding, because it can be a tremendous leverage, in fact, for development. Just one figure, with €1 in the area of infrastructure, etc., you can leverage 20 euros in private loans to build African infrastructure. That is worthwhile doing a lot more.
Thank you.
Yes, well, fortunately, the European Commission, Michel Barnier, came up with the proposal for the Transparency Directive, obliging companies to show if they have paid their taxes or not. And I think this is absolutely essential. And it's meant for the mining industries and the logging industries. But I would like to broaden this to other industries as well. Banking, for instance. 600 billion euros is escaping from developing countries each year for taxes not paid. And it's 5 times worldwide development aid. It would be nice to get this money. This is one thing. And I really hope we can strengthen this directive in the right way. And it will be ready by the end of this year or beginning next year, I hope. And I hope that Council will approve this as well. And here you have a role in your respective member states to put pressure on your governments to stand behind the proposal of the Commission as it is, and if eventually, if possible, of the improvements European Parliament will make to it. But really, we need your pressure on your governments. They are in a vast majority right-wing, and they think that the market has to do it in all freedom, but freedom is a very nice thing, but it doesn't work. Okay? In this way. In this way. Don't take me too literally. But yeah. I was a Democrat once. So, because I do not think that corporate social responsibility can be taken up just out of the free will of companies. You have to be a bit more coercive. And that is why we need this directive. That is why we need very coercive legislation on the European level to oblige companies to behave themselves. A company like Unilever is essential, but is also unique. The first, I would say, major worldwide concern that is aiming at completely sustainable production, from abolishing child labor to treating the environment as we should, etc. It is a very interesting project that Unilever is going through, but there are many, many more companies who do not deal with nature and human beings this way. So there's a lot to be done. Due diligence is not something you can get for free. It needs legislation.
If you look at the work and the issues of development in the South, most of the people, most of the communities we work with, essentially are in the private sector. They're self-employed. They're farmers. They're people making livings. They're people not on a salary or a wage. And I would hope, that the EU supports small-scale businesses, small and medium-scale businesses, because that, to me, is the engine growth, rather than as certainly my own government might do occasionally, which is focus only on the multinationals or all the big conglomerates. So that's the first point. The second thing on that point, just building on the transparency issue, that the bribery acts and all those areas that create a level playing field, so that the communities, the people that work in the South, know how much our companies pay in the South for the goods, the minerals, and so on, so that there can be real accountability of what's spent. So I just want to say that to me, private sector is more than big business. What do we want more or less differently from the EU? The first of all is carry on listening. There's been so much progress. I mean, I've not touched on climate finance, but again, a lot of a good thinking and integration of climate finance into the whole question of development is really, really important. Hopefully with new funds rather than development funds turned into climate finance funds. So carry on listening and make it happen on the ground. All these intentions need to happen on the ground itself. The second point is a plea for us in terms of the northern NGOs who are represented in this room as well. Work with us on some of these particular issues. You're going to be working through trying to get euros for the multi-annual financial framework. We're members of the countries. We can try to work on our governments on some elements of that. Work with us and on some of these issues, these big particular issues, as we work with our southern civil society organisations in their work and their capacity building on the ground as well. The third area is perhaps a bit more contentious. The whole of the Agenda for Change is predicated on a concept of economic growth. And I know it uses the word inclusive, but economic growth. And that's right. But you've got to start thinking about growth beyond GDP, beyond pounds. You've got to start thinking about it in the context of a finite planet where our resources are diminishing. You cannot have the exponential growth rates we've had in the north happening elsewhere. It's just not possible. So you've got to start thinking about equity and a different understanding of growth and using words like flourishing, well-being. And ultimately, it's got to be not just about decreasing the inequality, but it's got to be about a growth that's sustainable as well. I think these are particular issues that I think I would want the EU to continue to think about.